Here with another faith and baseball conversation. I'm here with my friend George McGovern, who is the chaplain for the New York Yankees. And yes, me being chaplain for the Indians, him being chaplain for the Yankees, we still get along. We're still friends. It's okay. We're okay. It can happen that way. So George, how are you doing, man? It's
Doing
good to see
good,
you.
Mike. Thanks for taking some time today to be with me.
No, thank you. Trust me, the honor's all mine that you would take this time to do this and have this conversation with me. So how are you and the family doing in New York? Everything, you guys healthy? Doing okay?
Yes, we're plugging along. Everyone's healthy. I feel like we're slowed down a little bit because the virus has limited us with personal contacts or face-to-face meetings. I've gotten used to Zooms and telephone conversations rather than, sitting across the table having a cup of coffee with a guy. But besides that, we're doing great.
Yeah, good. Now, you and I, we actually got connected through a mutual friend in Travis Hafner, who Travis used to play for the Indians, and then I think was it one season with the Yankees, which
That's
is where
right.
you and him connected. And Travis, geez, he was just there for 1 year, but speaks so highly of you and just the impact that you and your wife have made in him and his wife's life. And so when I was stepping into the chaplain role with the Indians, I got connected with Travis. He's like, "Hey, you need to talk to George. He's been doing this chaplain thing forever and just has a bunch of wisdom." So I think I got on the phone with you, and you didn't know me, you didn't owe me anything, anytime, but man, you spent not only that initial conversation, but multiple conversations after, just giving me so much wisdom and helping me kind of get some footing and some foundation in this ministry that I was stepping into that I didn't know a ton about or what it might look like. So I'm just always going to be so grateful for you, because like I said, you didn't owe me anything, you didn't need it, but you took the time to just instill some wisdom and some insight into me. Now, I think one of the things that you said was, here's the mistakes I've made. Don't do these. Kind of make your own mistakes at one point. And sure enough, I'm doing that and making my own mistakes as I go along. But yeah, just unbelievably grateful for you and just these last couple of years in this ministry for me, just the support and encouragement that you've been. So
Well, you've been a joy to get to know. And like you said, I can tell you what not to do because I've made, I think, just about every mistake. But, I'm just one beggar telling another beggar where he found some food, so glad to be a part of what you're doing there.
Yeah, it's been a good journey just these couple of years. Now tell me and anyone that's watching this a little bit about yourself. So you're a chaplain with the New York Yankees, but have you always lived in the New York area? Did you grow up there? And then, so tell me a little bit about your family, kind of your upbringing, some of your story there. And then even if you want to, how you got connected with the Yankees. Now, I will say before you get into that, I think you've chaplained just about every team within New York, except for, have you done the Islanders or the Rangers?
No,
Yeah?
I've not been in the, I've not been in the hockey world.
But just about everywhere else you've navigated. So,
Interestingly, I grew up. We now live back in the house that I grew up in. So I grew up in Oradell, New Jersey, which is a bedroom community to New York City. My dad commuted into the city for work for 40 or more years. Didn't grow up as a Christian. Never heard the gospel until I went to college, where I went to American University in Washington, D.C. And that's where I heard for the first time a clear, simple explanation of the gospel. It was through a ministry called Campus Crusade for Christ. And I came to Christ my freshman year at American, continued to be involved with Crusade all 4 years. So went right on the staff of Campus Crusade right out of college. Now I'm old. I graduated college in 1976. So I went right on staff, was assigned to the University of Georgia in the campus ministry. And while there, although I was kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none athlete, I played golf in high school. Now, I got a letter, and the only letter I got in high school was for golf, and that was back in 1972, 73. Actually, I graduated high school in 72, so this would be the early 70s. Getting a lettering in golf in high school in the early 70s was equivalent to getting a varsity letter for being on the chess team. You know, it was a sport that no one played, and so if you wanted to get a letter, but you weren't an athlete, you could play golf, and you could be assured of getting a varsity letter in the case that you wanted to wear a varsity jacket.
Now I know you're big into chess too. Did you letter in chess as well?
I did play a little chess in middle school, but I stopped short of getting a varsity letter in chess. But
Gotcha.
Anyway, so I played a little rugby in college at American University. So when I was assigned to the University of Georgia, be a part of that staff team, I was asked to work with some of the athletes on the campus there at University of Georgia. So I got acquainted with some of the athletes, worked a little bit at the University of Georgia with athletes, and then we were transferred to Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. Spent a year there working with students on that campus, some of them athletes. And then we were transferred to Rutgers University in New Jersey, New Brunswick. And I continued to be in the campus ministry there, but working percentage-wise, maybe a third of my time with the student athletes at Rutgers. Well, it was in 1990, 30 years ago, that I got a call asking if I would be interested in switching from the campus ministry of crew to the Athletes in Action Pro staff ministry. And they asked me that because the New York Jets and the New York Mets were looking for a chapel leader. The previous fellow was moving on. He was an Athletes in Action guy, but he was taking a leadership position at our headquarters. But I want to replace him with those two teams. So my wife and I thought about it, and it seemed like a good fit at our age and at our place we were with our 4 daughters. And so we switched over from the campus ministry in 1990 and worked with the New York Mets with baseball chapel, and then with the New York Jets as their chaplain for 6 seasons. So from 1990 through 1995.
So both of those were for 6 seasons then?
That's right, yes.
Gotcha, yep.
And so we commuted from New Brunswick, New Jersey to Shea Stadium with the Mets. And then at that time, the Jets practiced at Hofstra University in Hempstead, Long Island. It's only about a 35-mile as the bird flies to those places, but you have to go through 8 million people in order to get to those 2 places. And so we would sometimes have to leave as much as 2 hours of travel time in order to get to either Shea Stadium or out to Hofstra University.
So you're saying the commutes in like New York and New Jersey are a little different than the commutes around the Cleveland area, huh?
I would guess so. I've never commuted around Cleveland, but
oh, you would love it. Trust me, you would love it.
So, but we had fun serving in those 2 teams. That was the era when the Mets were not particularly good. 1990, they had Davey Johnson as their manager, and they were under 500 that year, and then he was let go. But
that was not indicative of the chaplain, though, right? Let's just be clear.
Well, I learned, you really can't take the credit for the losses or the wins, you know. So you blame the team all the time.
There you go.
So there for 6 seasons, but not the best 6 seasons the Mets have ever had. And then with the Jets, we made the playoffs 1 of the 6 seasons that I was there. So I didn't hit either team at a good stretch of their career, of their organizational life. But then we were asked to switch over to the Yankees and Giants in 1996. That would be our first year. Now I caught the Yankees at a good time because they won 4 out of 5 World Series those first 5 years that I was with the team. So like I said, I learned if you take credit for the victories, you've got to take responsibility for the losses. And I did with the Mets for 6 seasons, and I was not going to take responsibility for those losses.
That's funny.
And then the Giants, started with them in 96 and had the privilege of going to 3 Super Bowls with the Giants. They won 2 of the 3. So I caught both teams, in a sense, at a good era in their organizational life. I have since trained a younger fellow to work with the Giants. So in 2015 was my last year with the Giants. I still have the privilege of doing the chapel work for the Yankees. And for a stretch of about 6 years, I did the New Jersey Nets NBA team. And that's a
Now the
whole
Brooklyn
other,
Nets, right?
now
Oh,
the
yeah.
Brooklyn Nets, but they
Yeah.
were in New Jersey at the time.
Yep.
And that's a whole nother culture to do chapel work in. It's a different feel
Yeah.
than baseball and football.
So
So
right now,
that's my,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, that's my story in a nutshell.
In just a nutshell, does I do want to pick that apart a little bit because you like gloss over it. I'm sure there's, as you shared with me, just a bunch of wisdom and things that you've learned in those ministries. But yeah, I would love to hear a little bit. What are some of those differences that you notice in that chaplain ministry between an NFL team, an NBA team, and an MLB team? Like different approaches to it, different mentality, different kind of philosophy that you would bring to each one of those ministries?
They have their own little idiosyncrasies. In football, you generally have a Saturday evening chapel connected to the meetings that the players and coaches are in on Saturday evenings at the hotel. And those chapels can go as long as 25 minutes. You've got more freedom or more time in those chapels. They're combined with coaches and players in the same room. And I would either bring a guest speaker or I would speak myself. I tried to mix it up some. But in baseball, you do the chapels on Sunday mornings. You generally, from almost all the time, I'm the, like this, Mike, we're the only speaker that they will see that whole season. So that's one uniqueness, is that in baseball, the chapel leader is the speaker each week. In football, it's not unusual to bring a guest speaker in, maybe a former player. I've had James Brown, the CBS the CBS sports broadcaster in.
Yeah, not the singer, right? Not the
singer, right?
Not the musician.
James
Okay,
Brown,
gotcha. Yeah,
sports
gotcha.
broadcaster, but different guys like that.
It's such a lame joke.
Right.
I couldn't pass it up though. So
that's all right. But just different guys I thought the players could relate to, former athletes. Mike Singletary or Harry Carson, different guys that have played and were respected in the NFL world. I would try to get them to come and speak to the team. So, but in baseball, as you know, the chapel leader is the pastor in a sense. He's the speaker each week. And in baseball, you do a visiting chapel, where in football you would never, if you were a chaplain for a team, you would never speak to the other team the night before as well. That would be
that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
That would be like visiting the the enemy, in some way.
Interesting.
So, and in basketball, the uniqueness about basketball is that you combine the chapel attendees from each team. They meet together for one chapel. So you've got, let's say the New Jersey Nets would have 3 players, and if they were playing the Boston Celtics that night, you would maybe have 2 or 3 of the Celtics come into the room. So you'd have 5 to 7 players, and you'd say give one message to a combination of the 2 teams. That's the only league that I'm aware of where the players come together for the same.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic, huh?
Yeah, and in the NBA, you do a chapel before every game. It's not a Sunday only experience like baseball. A lot of times the players don't have games on Sunday, and so we would do a chapel whatever night they were the Nets were playing a game. We would do a pregame chapel before every home game. So there are 82 games in a NBA season. We would do 41 home chapels because they have half the chapels are home. So that's the largest number of chapels in any league that I'm aware of. So there are little idiosyncrasies like that.
Well, that's funny you bring up with the NBA every home game, because when my wife and I initially were stepping into the chaplain role with the Indians, that was one of the questions we had. Like, okay, there's a lot of games in the MLB season. Like, are we there for every single one? And if that's the case, is that possible? But yeah, when it turned out it was the Sundays and then different Bible studies and the relational aspect of it. So, so yeah, I mean, for you've been in this since, you said, 1990, uh, serving in chaplain ministry in a number of different leagues, number of different teams within New York and New Jersey. I mean, when you think back on it, what are some of your most favorite memories that kind of come to mind?
Hmm. Let's see, a bunch of them flood my mind. One is early 1990s, I think it was 1992. Dennis Byrd was a defensive end for the New York Jets, playing in a game. I was watching the game from home that day, and he broke his neck in a play on the field there, and they took him to Lenox Hill Hospital. Didn't know if they would let me in, but I drove to Lenox Hill Hospital and identified myself as the chaplain for the Jets. So I was allowed into the intensive care unit where Dennis was being stabilized. He still had his full uniform on. They'd taken off his helmet in order to, they'd sawn off his helmet actually to stabilize his neck. He couldn't feel anything from his neck down. He was paralyzed because he had broken 2 vertebrae at the base of his neck. And I'll never forget that conversation in the intensive care unit. Dennis's wife, Angie, was in the room. Pepper Burris, one of the assistant trainers for the Jets, and I, with 4 of it, we were the only 4 people in the room, and just trying to console Dennis and help him get through a traumatic moment in his life. And after a few minutes of conversation, Dennis said, "Can we pray?" Now, you would think the chaplain would have suggested that or led in that way, but it was Dennis who initiated that. So we prayed together, and as we said a short prayer and opened our eyes again, Dennis was crying, weeping like a baby, and we were again trying to console him and tell him, it's going to be okay. And when he got his composure, he said, do you want to know why I'm crying? And we said, sure, Den, what's going on? And he said, I'm crying because I'm remembering that Jesus Christ died for my sin.
Wow.
And it was obvious, although he didn't say it, what was obvious about that statement was that it reflected the fact that he was realizing that every foundational column in his life had just been knocked out from underneath him in that split second on that football field that afternoon. He didn't know, he couldn't feel his body. He didn't know whether he would be able to walk again or feel anything below his neck. He didn't know whether he'd be able to hold his wife again or the baby that was in Angie's womb that afternoon in that hospital. He didn't know how he was going to care for his family or provide for his family. Football was over. And so all those foundational columns had just been knocked out from underneath him, except for the fact that he had a relationship with Jesus Christ. His sins were forgiven. And I'm convinced that he was thanking the Lord for dying for his sins, because that was the column that he knew was still firm in his life. And then one day he would have a new body where he would be able to walk and jump again and whatnot. So that moment stands out as a powerful moment. Powerful memory, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
6 weeks to that day, Dennis walked out of the hospital on crutches, but able to feeling was restored to his body through the wonders of medicine, the miracle of medicine, but also I believe the power of God answering a lot of prayer and just intervening in that situation, both through the doctors and through direct intervention. Dennis obviously retired from football, went back to Owasso, Oklahoma, which is where he grew up, and lived a life of bearing witness to the testimony of Christ, not only forgiving his sin, but restoring him to a level of physical ability where he could help coach his high school football team.
Wow.
That's one memory that stands out.
Geez, just that small memory. My goodness, how powerful is that? That's something you never forget. Wow.
Here's a funny story real quick. Linebacker with New York Giants, started coming to chapel. His name is Ryan Phillips. He played in the 90s, late 90s. He started coming to chapel just out of curiosity. Got to know him through that, invited him to come to some Bible studies, but he hesitated. But then he was engaged, and he asked me if I would marry him and Angie that summer. And I said, sure, let's meet a few times and talk about it. So we met for you might call it like marriage counseling or
Yeah,
pre-marriage
right.
counseling, that type of stuff. And in the course of those conversations, I encouraged him and Angie to go to a off-season conference for pro athletes called Pro Athletes Outreach.
Hmm.
You would know it as the Increase now.
Hmm.
And they went, and I was down in the conference was in Orlando. I was in Tampa in February, the same time the conference was going on because of spring training. Ryan called me up Sunday morning of the conference. It was going to be ending that day. And he called me up Sunday morning and said, "Hey, George, I want you to know something." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Angie and I became Christians last night at this conference. And we are planning to still get married in June with the grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles, but we would like you to marry us, if possible, sooner than that, because we realized they'd been living together, and we realized that we want to do this right, and we want to be married so that we can just follow the Lord's in the way His will is for married couples and for engaged couples." So I said, "Sure." I said, "When do you want to get married?" He said, "Well, we'd like to get married this afternoon." So I said, "Would you marry us?" And so I said, I sensed his sincerity. And so I said, "Why don't you come over to Lakeland, Florida? I'll meet you in Lakeland. We'll have a meaningful ceremony. Bring Scotty and Chas Gallion, who is another linebacker, and his wife, who were at the conference. Bring them to be your witnesses, and we'll have a meaningful ceremony." So they came over, and we had a very meaningful ceremony. About 10 of us gathered. And I said, "Now, there's no marriage license. You guys are married before in God's eyes, but you need to get a marriage license
Yeah.
and make this right in the government's eyes." And they said, "Sure, no problem." So they flew to Idaho, which is where they were from,
Okay.
walked into the county courthouse and said, "We'd like to get a marriage license. We were just married a couple of days ago down in Florida." And the woman says, "We can't give you a Idaho marriage license for a wedding ceremony that took place in Florida. You're going to have to get married by the justice of the peace here so you can get an Idaho marriage license." So the next day they walked into the justice of the peace office there in Idaho. It was Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they were married before the justice of the peace. And then they still wanted to have the June wedding ceremony where grandma and grandpa could go. So they flew us out. They flew us out that summer to marry them a third time. So maybe that's the key.
At that point, it's sealed. It's
That's
done.
right. And they're still married to this day. So maybe that's one of the keys to longevity in marriage. Get married 3 times.
3 different times, multiple states. That secures it. That's classic.
Yeah. Anyway, those are
just
some memories that stand out.
Yeah, I could just picture you on the phone. Oh, you want to move up the wedding? Okay, what month? Oh, can we do it? Can we do it today? Oh, yeah, sure. Why not? Sure, why not? I'll be right there. Let me just hop in my rental car. That's classic.
We had to do some scrambling.
Yeah. So I would love to hear, and you talked about this a little bit, particularly from the baseball chaplaincy side of things, where there's chapel on Sundays. You do a chapel for the home team, visiting team, umpire ministry as well. But just to kind of talk a little bit more for people that might be watching that don't know, like what is the role of a baseball chaplain? What does that entail? And in particular, I would love for you kind of talk a little bit about the grind of it. Like I find myself telling people, and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" I talk about, well, it's more grind than glamour, because I think people's minds are that, oh, you're with all these professional athletes and you kind of get to be a part of, their lifestyle, whatever people envision there. I'm like, oh no, it's much more of a grind. My my visiting team chapels are in an equipment closet, and we sit on Gatorade coolers and ball bags and things like that, and just even some of the relationship that you're after, because you want to be in those discipling relationships with guys and with their spouses and with their families. But because of the craziness of their schedules and stuff, it's so difficult to even get that time. So that's all part of the grind. Now there is also this side that is glamour, where I say, like, it is cool. There are Sundays where I'm standing on the field, like talking to players and coaches like that's cool. Right. And I try not to lose sight of what a unique privilege and blessing it is that God has called me and allowed me and my wife to be a part of this ministry. But there's definitely a grind to it that a lot of people wouldn't see or wouldn't expect, I guess. So we'd love to hear kind of your take on just the chaplain ministry, what that looks like, even some of your approaches or philosophy of approach to it.
Sure. You're right. It is a grind, and the perception is nowhere near reality. The perception of what we do doesn't come close to reality. I spend more, and you do, I'm sure, spend more time in those runways, those hallways outside of clubhouses than you actually spend time in the clubhouses. In New York, I don't know if this is true in Cleveland, but we're allowed to go into the clubhouse when the media is allowed to go in, and then when the media is kicked out, we're kicked out as well. So it's not like we're chapel leaders where we can be running in the clubhouse anytime we want to talk to a player. We are under restrictions equivalent to what the media is allowed or not allowed to do. Yeah. And so we are waiting oftentimes out in that hallway outside of the clubhouse, waiting for the time when the players and or coaches are in a place where they can take 10 or 15 minutes for a chapel time. And you're right, I've had visitors' chapels in the shower stall, in the large shower stall.
Everyone's clothed though, right? Let's just
yes, everyone's clothed.
Yeah,
but
okay,
there's still dripping coming out of the shower nozzles, and so some of us are getting dripped on while we might have a baptism in there.
Baptism. Maybe it's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, so it's, again, we have most of our visiting chapels in the same, well, not the same equipment room, but the equivalent of your equipment room. We have it in our visitors equipment room at Yankee Stadium, and it's a no frills chapel. There's no choir, there's no special music, there's no collection of one offering or anything like that. It's just someone, you ask someone to open up in prayer, or I open up in prayer, maybe a player, and then you deliver a 12 to 16 minute message dealing with a particular topic that, by the way, is being spoken on across the league, not just across big league baseball, but across minor league baseball as well. So if a player is sent down to AAA, he will not miss a step as far as hearing a consistent message, say through the Gospel of Matthew or through another book of the Bible. There's a consistency up and down the professional baseball chain, which I really appreciate. So you give a 12 to 16 minute message from a biblical passage. Either you or someone else closes in prayer. Then the guys shake their hands. They go back to their batting cage or pitching mounds, wherever they're supposed to be at that next segment. And we go back out into the hallway and wait for the next possible connection, which might be with the umpires. And sometimes they're not interested. And so you knock on their door, you ask the umpires, the room attendant, baseball chapel, would the umps want to, can I pray for them, or would they want to know about the chapel? Sometimes and then he goes and asks the chief, if the crew chief, if baseball chapel should be allowed in. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And so you get used to rejection, or, no, we're not interested, your message is not pertinent to our lives. You get those kind of feelings, but other times you're welcomed in. And so the chapel is not a glorious prance through locker rooms and managers' offices. It's oftentimes dealing with rejection, dealing with lack of interest, fellows putting priority on their profession rather than their priority on a relationship with God. And so you're just journeying through all of that stuff in the course of maybe being at the ballpark for an hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours. But most of that time you're waiting for your turn to show up on the itinerary.
Yeah. I've told people on a Sunday, it's not uncommon for me to have longer conversations with the security that's either in the hallways, things like that. And so I viewed that as a big part of the ministry as well. I'm getting to know the clubbies, the clubhouse attendants, although on game days, they're running crazy as well. the guy that's overseeing like the equipment, that sort of thing, security guys, the parking lot attendant who I try to bring Starbucks every Sunday, you know, just like that. I mean, that's a part of the ministry too. Because those are a lot of times when you're sitting around waiting in between the home chapel, away chapel, or like you said, little one-off conversations with a player or coach here and there. You're interacting with those guys as well.
You're right. It's important to have in mind that our service is not to just players and coaches. Our service is to anyone connected at the ball, connected to the ballpark that day. So like you said, it could be security, could be a clubby, it could be an equipment guy. It's anyone that we cross paths with. We just want to be available for God to use us in a short conversation or a longer conversation, hoping to point people to the Savior. So you're right. It's a multifaceted, not too glorious job.
Yeah. I think it was you that earlier on may have described it, the chaplain ministry to me in this way, that you're almost like a missionary to the team. Like you're an outsider, you know, kind of heading to this foreign country, and you have to learn the language, and you have to learn the etiquette and the protocols and way of doing things, you know, and you are kind of this outsider. And so when you can't just, like you said, just walk around the clubhouse whenever. There's a time and a place and a way in which you do that, because like you said, that there is a profession that these guys have that they're getting ready for, and they have protocols and they have routines and things like that. And you don't want to, you know, necessarily disrupt that, but at the same time, you want to give this invitation to come and be a part of chapel, you know, and participate in it. Even like you said, if it's just for that 15-20 minutes, whatever it may be on that Sunday.
Right. And some people might benefit from just a picture. If you were to walk into a factory, say an assembly line where automobiles were being made and built, and how much attention could that assembly line worker give you when he's putting a mirror onto the side of a car, 8 hours a day, and he only gets a 15-minute break and then a half hour for lunch. Well, we're that guy that kind of waits alongside of the assembly line until that 15-minute break comes. We invite them into a room for 12 to 15 minutes. We share a nugget of truth with them from the Gospels or the Gospel itself, and then they go back to that assembly line, and we go on our way. We're not holding court there in the clubhouse. We're not going around telling jokes or getting autographs or anything like that.
Right.
In fact, we're forbidden from autograph seeking, all that kind of stuff. And so it is very much a servant position and a servant's experience.
Yeah. No, and I love that. And you were the first one to bring that up, and then even Travis kind of reiterated that with me when we were heading into this, that you have to have that posture of being a servant. Like, you are there to serve them. And you and Travis both told me that for some of these guys or their spouses and their families, that us as chaplains, we might be one of the few, if not the only person in their life that never asks something from them, doesn't want gear or tickets or an autograph, things like that, but rather having that posture of, what can I do for you? What do you need? How can I serve you? And you telling me that was just drilled in my mind heading into this.
Yeah. And the fellow who trained me in this work had three lines on top of what you just said. He said, keep praying, keep showing up, and good things happen when you arrive early. Those were his three mantras, in a sense. Keep praying, keep showing up, because there are going to be times when you're not going to feel like showing up because you got rudely pushed out of the clubhouse or something. And then good things happen when you arrive early, is what he told me. So I've tried to internalize those qualities or those suggestions, because it is not a glamorous job, that's for sure.
Yeah. Um, but like you, I love it and I feel
Yeah.
called to it. You know, it's that ministry that God's opened up for us and that we've had the privilege to step into. Now I would love to hear, I don't know if you and I have talked about this necessarily, um, but the fandom piece of being a chaplain and a chapel leader has been really interesting to me. So I grew up in the Cleveland area, grew up going to watch the Cleveland Indians play along with the Cavs and the Browns as well. You know, so although the Browns this season, hey, we'll take it. They're
Yeah.
rolling,
Yeah.
but so I grew up, you know, going to the games like maybe you did, you know, growing up in the New York area. Um, and so one of the things that I've noticed, and I've also told people this, that I don't think always computes in their minds. I tell people my fandom's pretty much gone at this point from the Indian standpoint. Like I would always pull for them to win, and I have, you know, at home a lot of times like I have the game on in the background and things like that. But when the game's on, if a certain player that I've gotten to know or have a relationship with is up to bat or is pitching and things like that, I find myself praying for them, not necessarily so that they just do good, you know, and so that they win. I do want them to do that, but because I know the impact that that performance has on their livelihood, on whether or not they may get sent down or traded or things like that. And so that consistency kind of for them, and then just realizing like these are regular, ordinary, normal guys that just happen to have a unique skill set that our culture just happens to elevate that skill set up on this pedestal. And so they become kind of these celebrities or whatever it may be, but they're just regular, ordinary guys trying to figure out and ask similar questions that you would ask and that I would ask that, okay, what does it mean to live for Jesus? How do I be a good husband? And how do I be a good father? You know, when I'm away in this unique sport for a period of time. But yeah, that fandom piece is just gone. And it really is just like a ministry like you would at a campus crusade kind of ministry or ministry as a pastor at a church. Like this is your congregation. These are your people and you want to serve them and shepherd them and pastor them. So, I mean, does that resonate with you?
Oh,
Do you kind of
sure.
feel that from the
I
fandom
really,
standpoint?
no, I cannot add anything to what you just described because you nailed it right on the head. You move from fan to servant be, because you're not cheering for the uniform. There's a person in that uniform,
That's
and
it. Yep.
you know his fears, you know his struggles, some of the relational issues going on. You know that person at a level where you want to pray for him, and so you really don't care as much whether they win or lose the game, but you're praying for those individuals that you've gotten to know, that you want them to grow and to uh, shine and flourish as a human being, as a husband, as a father, as a ball player. And so it takes you, it's at a different level. I remember that reminded me of my first chapel with the New York Jets, 1990, that season. And I remember the fear I had just before I stood up to start the chapel. The thought went through my mind, and I'm sure it was one of these battles, spiritual battle moments, but the thought went through my mind, George, who do you think you are standing up and speaking to these guys? These guys are the best of what they do. And you are not the best of the best chapel speaker or communicator in the world. You know, Chuck Swindoll, John MacArthur, Tony Evans, someone better than you should be in this position, not you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to fight through that. And the verse that came to mind was in Thessalonians, Paul says, faithful is he who has called you, and he shall also bring it to pass. Meaning, if God calls you to do something, he will equip you or enable you to do what you've been called to do. And that's the promise that I had to cling to as I got off my chair and stood up in front of those guys and
Yeah.
just trusted God to speak through me, because I definitely did not have the same communication ability that they had in their athletic ability. So
Oh,
we
that's
were not on
interesting.
the, we were
Yeah.
not, I didn't feel we were on the same level, but God
Yeah.
graced me with the confidence and the boldness to speak, because I transferred my confidence from myself, which wasn't a good place to put it,
Hmm.
to my confidence in God to give me the words, to give me the ideas, the clarity of thought to speak through me, so that those guys would hear a message with authority and clarity.
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten that, because there is that tendency when you go into a group or a culture of people that you feel are the best of what they do. It
Hmm.
could be entertainment, it could be music, it could be athletics, it could be government, whatever. But you've got to go claiming the authority that you have. When Jesus said, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and earth, go therefore and make disciples." I bring you into my authority so that you can speak with that authority to whoever. And I clung to that many, many a time.
That's so good. I mean, that's a great word right there. Now, I do have to say, I didn't think of that perspective of these guys are the best, the best at what they do, and I'm not the best. So now there's one more thing I have to think about and worry about when I head it. But thank you. Yeah. So at least you gave me some scripture to back it up and to combat that spiritually. So that's fine though. So I would love to hear too. It's no secret to anyone that 2020 has been a year unlike any other on a number of different levels. And it's probably been a year unlike any other that you've seen in your 30 plus years of this type of ministry. Um,
Right.
just from the baseball standpoint of access to players, access to the stadium, things like that, not being in place because of COVID. So I'd love to hear from you what the ministries kind of looked like for you, the difficulty through it, but also because God redeems all things and His work in all things, things that you've seen God do, even in the middle of some of those difficulties or challenges that have come up.
Yeah, this has been a year by itself for sure. I mean, the negatives: didn't go to the ballpark once, couldn't get into the
Right.
ballpark. That we were considered non-essential staff, and so there was no meetings in the ballpark at all. Uh, there was a little. We did these Zoom chapels, but that's another little step that a player kind of has to take in order to get to a chapel. So we had fewer players attending our chapels this year than we had when we would go to the ballpark and guys would show up, in person, I guess you'd say. Um, so that was a negative. And then my appointments per se, my one-on-one times were telephone calls, where instead of going to the ballpark and sitting in the press room and talking to a guy for 25 minutes or so in the press room about growing in his relationship with Christ, it was now a phone call situation. So those were some down moments, but some of the upside to all this was the Zoom chapels enabled us not only to bring the big league players and coaches into the room, but also we invited and got minor league ball players and minor league coaches to come on to the Zoom chapel. And so sometimes we had half the room, half the Zoom room was
Nice.
minor league players. Yeah, minor
Yeah.
league players and minor league coaches who there was no minor league baseball this year. So they were just sitting at home, and maybe some of them went to church, and I encourage that and respect that for
Mm-hmm.
sure. But there were some, either because of the hour of the morning that we had the chapel, they could jump onto this Zoom chapel, and they enjoyed a level of fellowship or some teaching and encouragement that they might not have gotten if things were otherwise. And so there
Yeah.
were some advantages. And one-on-one telephone calls, I got used to the impersonalness of that relative to sitting next to a guy in person, be able to read body language and eye contact, that kind of stuff. I just got used to how to effectively, to the best of my ability, communicate over the phone a biblical message or a discipleship lesson of some sort. And so there were ups and
Hmm.
downs. You're right.
Yeah. Just a unique year. So,
Yeah.
well, hey, George, I appreciate you having this conversation. with me and just talking about this. But mostly I appreciate just all your years of faithfully and obediently following God and just serving in this ministry, wherever it's taken you, whatever team it's opened up to you. And I know you hit on a couple stories, but earlier on in the conversation of memories and things you've seen God do, I'm sure you could have spent hours talking about all the things that you've seen God do. And I'm sure we could have player and coach after coach or family after family that could speak to the impact that you've made in their lives. So truly just thank you for your love for Jesus, your love for people, and just your faithfulness to this ministry, George. So
Well,
and
thanks,
thank you.
Mike. I'm enjoying getting
Yeah.
to know you, and we'll connect further more times down the road here. I look forward to it.
All right. Definitely. Hey,
Take
take
care,
care,
brother.
George. Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.